In the first part of In the Footsteps of Our Ancestors, we came to know Nicolai Severin Wilhelm Jensen Harlev, a Danish boy from the small village of Vilhelm in 1837, who would later be known as William Harlev. We followed him from the fields of his Jutland childhood to the bustling streets of Aarhus and the vibrant life of Copenhagen, onward to Sweden, and then across the long and perilous voyage over the Atlantic with his wife Thora, bound for the promised land of America. His path led him through Winona and Mankato until in 1871 he arrived in Chicago, a city still trembling with smoke, ash, and the restless energy of rebuilding after the Great Fire. Here a new chapter began, carried by hope, ambition, and the dream of a brighter future. Yet fate proved cruel. Only a year later, William's life was struck by tragedy when Thora lost her life in an accident, struck down by a horse-drawn carriage on the streets of Chicago. And it is here that we return to his story, the tale of a man who, with strength, courage, and unyielding determination, carved his way forward and built a life defined by success and prosperity. In the old days, it was quite common that when a man became a widower, he would remarry soon after. And the same applied, of course, to women, as there wasn't as much support available as today. But William was likely so occupied with his businesses that he didn't have time to look for a new wife. I imagine that someone from the family in Chicago was kind enough to help him with household chores and taking care of his son, William Jr. However, his partner, Christian Johansson, had a sister named Karen Marie, who might have worked in one of the stores or been his housekeeper. In any case, Karen Marie and William got together and were married in 1874. Karen Marie was born in November 1847 in Sindal in Hjørring County, Denmark, and came to America in 1870. William was diligent in placing ads in newspapers, which were not only read in Chicago, but also in Sweden. By the end of 1870, the following Danish-American advertisement was mentioned in a Swedish newspaper in Sweden. Last week, a storm, yes, a hurricane, raged over Chicago. The waters of Lake Michigan were whipped into foam, and its waves were as mighty as a Danish Chamberlain. We are on Lake Street in the midst of the storm. The rain is pouring down, and it is bitingly cold. A young man is trying to fight his way against the storm. He succeeds, although progress is slow. But what? He is singing? He, who must be soaked and frozen, he is singing. Yes, readers, he can sing all right, for he feels neither rain nor cold, thanks to the fortunate circumstance that he is wearing a raincoat of the kind one can only get from William Harlev at number 216 on Milwaukee Avenue. Could this piquant author of the ad be the familiar photographer Harlev? End of quote. William had gradually found his way into the finer circles among prominent Danes and Americans. He became a member of several fraternities and lodges. Among these were the Knight Templars, 3 Degree Knight, Odd Fellows, and the Knights of Pythias, where he held the position of Chancellor. The list also includes the Elks, the Red Men, the Mystic Shrine, and others. Another member of the Round Table and one of Denmark's most outstanding members was Dr. Christian Fenger, born in Bjørning, Ringkøbing County in 1840. He was highly respected by all. As a young man, he traveled through Europe and eventually served in the French army during the Franco-German War in 1870. Later, he went to Egypt and offered his services to the ruling Khedive. He then found his way to Chicago in the 1870s, arriving penniless. His only possession was a mummy, which he had to sell to survive. Dr. Fenger was incredibly skilled as a physician and surgeon, but he lacked the ability to promote his own talents, and only a few patients found their way to his office near Milwaukee Avenue. But Fenger's luck changed when a mason named Hans Christian Hansen came to his practice with trichinosis and left cured. Hans was William's brother-in-law, and William publicized Fenger's medical achievement and had the case covered in medical journals as well as in Chicago newspapers, and William's influence helped establish Fenger in the medical world. Through William's political connections, Fenger was employed at Cook County Hospital, and he worked at several medical institutions in Chicago, becoming one of the most respected surgeons in America. He also became the first doctor of anatomical pathology in Chicago City. He also had Fenger Academy High School named after him in 1893. Not content with running two businesses, William was also one of those people who was not satisfied with slow progress. He had speed and energy in him, and the slow path to wealth and respect did not satisfy him. In 1875, inspired by the local farmers of the time, he had the bright idea that a Danish Chicago newspaper could be the path to wealth and honor. He presented the idea to the colony's prominent individuals at the time, such as Salmonson, John P. Hansen, Dr. Jacobson, Dr. Fenger, and Consul Emil Dreyer. They were enthusiastic about the idea and started with $3,000, which was a significant amount at that time. Harlev was chosen as treasurer and manager, Salmonson became the editor, and the newspaper was named Heimdall. Things went well as long as there was money in the treasury. However, after almost 2 years, the treasury was empty, and there was a dispute in the family when William wanted more money for operating capital. He ended up taking over the newspaper for his own account, as he had around $3,000 owed to the company. As mentioned before, William was a man of action, and now the newspaper had to be built up into something substantial. A new large corner property was purchased at Ohio and Green Street, and a large sign with the name Heimdall was placed on top of the building. An office was set up on the first floor, and a printing press was installed in the basement. Despite William's funds and Salmonson's wisdom, the newspaper unfortunately did not do well. After 3 years, William grew tired of the newspaper business and sold the entire enterprise to Professor Frederickson, who ran it for a short while before selling it to Fritz France, who owned it until it slowly faded away. After this experiment, William realized that neither as a newspaper publisher nor as a merchant was he destined to make the millions he had dreamed of since his days behind the counter in Skive. Eventually, his two businesses weren't generating enough income, leading to their closure. But William refused to give up. As mentioned earlier, later in his life, William was interviewed by a newspaper where he talked about his life from childhood when he came to America in 1857, to the contracts he secured for the railroads expanding westward. He described how he built station buildings and warehouses, although not exactly in that way. He likely crafted this story to make it easier for him to enter the construction industry, because in 1879, he started a contracting business with his brother-in-law, Hans Christian Hansen, who had been working as a master mason for a long time.
Oh well, I said I came to America in 1857, but who's counting years when contracts are on the line? Let's just say I built stories as well as houses, and maybe the truth took a little detour.
William began with smaller buildings and laid some of the finest brick pavements on the streets and sidewalks of Chicago and other states. Previously, the pavements were made of wood, but after the Great Fire of 1871, there was a shift towards using bricks due to safety concerns. His brickwork was extensive, and his public buildings in the States illustrated his skill. It didn't take long before his name as a contractor became known as one of the biggest in Chicago. In 1880, he became a general contractor, and his first major contract was the Cook County Insane Asylum in Dunning. This contract was worth a couple of $100,000, and soon after, he also got the contract for the poorhouse and other county buildings in Dunning, totaling around $500,000. His brother-in-law, Hans Christian Hansen, who was also a contractor and a practical man, assisted him with these building projects. There were, however, various problems, both political and non-political, concerning these insane asylums and poorhouses, including corruption, embezzlement, and fraud. Some politicians had to go to jail, but William managed to clear himself. Now I need to go back to William's interview with the American newspaper, which was later published in the Danish newspaper, the Daily News. In the interview, he talked about his son, Alfred George Victor, who was born in 1859 while the family was living in Blue Earth, Minnesota. At an early age, he sent Alfred to Denmark, a country with an education system that was hardly surpassed in Europe or America. He told that Alfred was placed in the national schools, all of which were under government control through the Royal College. Denmark also had a military school, the Royal Academy, akin to a Danish West Point. In this institution, young Alfred Harlev received an excellent education, particularly in civil engineering. The clever young Danish American ensured he obtained a lieutenant rank under the Danish government. However, after a few years, he decided to return to the country his father had adopted and where he himself was born. So in 1877, Alfred returned to Chicago. And there I need to stop him again, for once more, he carelessly skirts the truth. But that could be part of his game. The true story was, as you already know, that Alfred was born in Skive in 1859 and not in America. His mother was Hulda, and before Alfred was born, William moved from Skive and was conscripted into the military in Aarhus. Denmark assisted in providing Alfred with the necessary knowledge and experience, perhaps even an education in the construction industry. But finally, in 1882, Alfred was granted a 3-year leave of absence from the military and traveled to America. He was then also allowed to use the surname Harlev. Before Alfred crossed the Atlantic, he had a girlfriend named Lydia Metter, who was actually his cousin. She was the daughter of Alfred's mother's sister, and the year after Alfred's departure, Lydia also traveled to America to be with Alfred, where they got married and had 2 children. In the beginning, Alfred and Lydia lived with William, Karen Marie, and William Jr. at 126 Park. Together, William and Alfred founded the company W. Harlev & Son. At the time, the youngest son, William Jr., was a student in high school. William, who was a social democrat, ran for the Chicago municipal election as a city council candidate in 1883. He received assistance from none other than Louis Pio to achieve this position. Louis Pio was not only the founder of the Danish Social Democratic Party, but also the restless spirit behind the newspaper Social Demokraten. He dared to challenge the establishment, provoking the anger of conservatives and the police alike. Yet the Constitution, with its promise of free speech and assembly, shielded him and his comrades, at least for a time. In 1872, when the Masons of Copenhagen struck for shorter hours, Pio summoned workers to a great gathering at Nuremberg. The authorities, fearing revolt, outlawed the meeting. Undeterred, Pio and his allies pressed on, only to be arrested in the night before it could take place. The workers came anyway, and on that May day, they faced police and soldiers in a clash later remembered as the Battle of Felden. Pio was condemned to long years of solitary confinement, where the silence and meager diet broke his body. By 1875, so frail that he seemed close to death, he was pardoned and released. He returned to his post as leader and editor, but the fire of earlier days burned lower. A lost election, mounting debts, and lingering illness weakened his standing, and the police, sensing their chance, offered him money to leave Denmark forever. In 1877, Pio boarded a ship for America with his family and closest companions. In the New World, he quickly recognized the hardships of workers and urged them to fight for change. For a moment, his words stirred hope among Scandinavian laborers in Chicago. But rivalries with fellow Danes and whispers about his past eroded trust. He drifted between journalism, politics, and small ventures, unable to reclaim the influence he once held. It was through Chicago's Round Table Circle that Pio met William Harlev, and in 1883, Harlev ran for city council and sought Pio's help to rally working-class votes. Pio agreed on the promise of a public office. After Harlev's victory, Pio was appointed overseer of a hospital construction project. For a brief while, it seemed he had found a new beginning, yet corruption ran through the project, and Pio, unwilling to compromise, soon lost his post. So ended the journey of Louis Pio, the fiery agitator who once shook Copenhagen with his words, now a weary exile in a foreign land, torn between ideals he would not abandon and the harsh demands of survival. In 1885, the 74th Illinois General Assembly enacted legislation to establish a soldiers' and sailors' home for honorably discharged former soldiers and sailors who had served in the Illinois State Militia, the U.S. Army, or Navy during the Revolutionary War and the Mexican War. The home was intended for those who had become disabled and unable to work during their service due to injury, old age, or other disabilities, and who were disqualified from earning a living. The Illinois Soldiers and Sailors Home was designated and located by Governor Oglesby just outside the northern borders of Quincy on an area of 140 acres. When construction bids were solicited, William secured the contract for the construction of the main building. Construction began in May 1886, and on the 2nd of August that same year, in a small and informal ceremony, William laid the cornerstone of the main building. A part of this stone can still be seen today at the northwest corner of the building. The home was formally opened in March 1887. While building there, William was impressed by the beauty of Quincy and decided to make it his future home. After completing the work on the home's grounds, he announced his intention to settle permanently in Quincy. From then on, he actively participated in bids for more construction projects and secured contracts to build several of the new houses at the home. About William, it was written, Mr. Harlev built a large residential property at the corner of Elm and 4th Street, and in every way working to convince our people that he has decided to make Quincy his future home. He is an energetic man, full of Chicago humor, and has the happy ability to make friends everywhere. He is generous, a royal entertainer, and made of the right material to create a vibrant city in Quincy. Quote ends. But in the meantime, something happened in Sweden. On the 5th of November, 1887, the newspaper Nerikes Allehanda mentioned under the headline, a photographic story. I quote, the newspaper Interocean tells of a Chicago artist, Emil Lehmann, who a few decades ago was supposed to learn the art of photography in Örebro from a Danish resident there, who demanded and received 600 riksdaler in advance. A few days later, the photographer disappeared from the city, and with him disappeared Lehmann's 600 riksdaler. Lehmann eventually learned the art himself and emigrated to Germany and other European countries before finally coming to America. Here he fell into poor circumstances until one day he spotted the same name in a Chicago newspaper that had swindled him of his money 20 years earlier. He went to the swindler's workplace to find out if it was truly the same person, and it indeed was. In Chicago, the swindler lived in an elegant house, was very wealthy, and was on familiar terms with the highest officials in Cook District's tax department. Lehmann not only received his 600 riksdaler, but also received several orders and recommendations from the former photographer to his influential friends. Thus, the poor artist is on the way to building a fortune. It would be infinitely interesting to know the name of this Danish trickster, says Svenska Tribunen. This curiosity could possibly be satisfied in Örebro. In the early 1800s, a photographer named William Harlev from Denmark lived there, whose now worn painted sign can still be seen on the wall of Widow Ekblad's property on Koopmangaten. On the 1st of May, 1864, Harlev, who earned a lot of money but was not good with finances and led a princely lifestyle, went bankrupt and left the area with his wife and mother-in-law shortly after. In his final days, he seems to have had an assistant named Carl Lehmann. Quote ends. Yes, there's probably no doubt that the Danish trickster mentioned was indeed William. It's not surprising that he was quick to repay Lehmann and help him gain favor among his influential friends, because William would have been exposed to more fraud if Lehmann had published the true story in one of the Chicago newspapers. At that time, when the incident occurred in Sweden, William had claimed to work as a constructor in America. Well, back in Quincy, William secured several major contracts for public buildings, totaling $5 million, including the New Comp Hotel in 1887. In 1889, he obtained another significant contract to build Quincy City Hall. Unfortunately, the following year in 1890, a tragedy struck the Hanson family when William's sister, Anne Charlotte Matilde, died at the young age of 46. Matilda, as she was called, and Hans Christian were supposed to have 12 children together, of which 6 died at a very young age. When Matilda passed away, Hans Christian was left alone with 3 young children: Lillian at 2 years old, Arthur at 6 years old, and William at 8 years old. Hans Christian, now 50 years old, was unable to take care of the children and work simultaneously, so William and Karen Marie took in Lily, while the boys went to a home. But of course, they didn't want to stay there, and they escaped several times to get back to their father. So it ended up that William and Karen Marie also took them in. The 2 youngest children, Lily and Arthur, were adopted. After William emigrated to America, he maintained significant contact with his family in Denmark through letters throughout his life. It was also through correspondence that his mother, sister, and brother-in-law arrived in America in 1870, just like his brother Jens Peter did in 1873. Later, 2 nephews also came to America at William's invitation. Among them was Hans Lauge Jensen, born in 1865 in Snibjerg, and the son of William's big brother, Frederick Christian Harlev, who is the script director's great-great-grandfather. Hans emigrated to America at a very young age, most likely before his confirmation. The exact reason is not certain, but he probably wanted more out of life like William, and he'd have succeeded as well. I assume William was Hans' guardian and guide him on the right path. But Hans had quite a different talent from William's profession. He became a boxer, and he was actually quite good at it. Like many young men starting boxing careers, Hans felt the need to change his name to something more Irish-sounding, to increase his popularity. Not many fight fans would have believed that a man named Hans Lauge Jensen could be a formidable fighter, so he changed his name to Harry McCoy. In an article in the Quana Tribune in Texas in 1927, written by the Danish consul in New York upon Harry's death, it was mentioned that McCoy came to America from Denmark and grew up in Chicago. While being a boxer didn't bring in enough income, he also had a job as a firefighter. His dedication as a firefighter led to his appointment as the fire department chief. However, he suffered severe injuries in action, which ended his boxing career. In the late 1800s, he moved to Quanah, Texas, where he built a house in connection with a business. He became an expert locksmith and gunsmith, which made him indispensable to the town and the countryside for many years. Whenever a safe or something important needed fixing, McCoy was called upon, and he never failed to help those in need. Many times when a piece of machinery at the Tribune chief broke, McCoy quickly fixed it. McCoy passed away in 1927 at the age of 62 in Quanah Hospital. He had been in poor health for some time, and his death was expected. Harry McCoy was married multiple times, but he never had any children. The second nephew who traveled to Chicago was Jens Harlev, born in 1858 in Hauge, near Vinderslev in Viborg County, and he was the son of William's other big brother, Niels Henning Harlev. Jens was educated as a dentist and practiced in Copenhagen, where he also married Anna Benson. They had a daughter, Odette, in 1886, and on October 1st, 1890, they had a son named Niels Axel William Harlev. But in the church records, I come across something strangely, because here it states that contractor William Harlev is listed as the godfather when Niels Axel is baptized on the 4th of January, 1891. Could William have been on a brief visit to Denmark? Another curious fact is that William's nephew Jens traveled to America a month before his son was born. And just under 3 weeks after the baptism of Alex, Anna and the children followed to Chicago. Jens practiced as a dentist there, and he was doing well. Unfortunately, Anna died before 1898, leaving Jens alone with 2 young children and his practice. So he remarried on September 24th, 1898, to 26-year-old Marie Olsen. After 1900, they moved to the village of Winnebago, just outside Chicago, where he continued his dental practice. However, on September 30th, 1910, Jens passed away, leaving behind his wife and 5 children. Chicago was long known as a dirty city, and one can imagine that as the city grew, the population and industries like steel mills, Lumber mills, meatpacking, glue, soap, and leather factories sprouted along the river and dumped their industrial waste into it. The rapid proliferation of docks with cargo and passenger ships also caused severe pollution in the river. To address this, Chicago built one of the country's first comprehensive sewer systems in 1855. But they all drained into the lake, the city's source of fresh drinking water. Outbreaks of dysentery, cholera, and typhoid naturally occurred periodically, raising fears that an epidemic could one day devastate the city. One solution proposed was to reverse the flow of the river so that it would not empty into the lake, but instead be directed into the Illinois and Michigan Canal, carrying the city's wastewater down towards the Mississippi River. The first attempt involved deepening the Illinois and Michigan Canal, where it joined the South Branch, and installing pumps to push some of the contaminated water in the desired direction. In 1889, Chicago voted to establish the Sanitary District of Chicago, entrusting the new agency with the task of permanently reversing the course of the Chicago River by digging an entirely new, larger canal. In 1892, William Harlev and Sons secured a contract for the construction of the vast Illinois Drainage Canal, one of the greatest engineering feats in history and comparable to the Suez and Manchester canals in Europe. The Harlev firm was among those helping to reverse the flow of the Chicago River, safeguarding the city's drinking water from pollution. However, in the construction industry, it was not uncommon, and it still isn't, for a contractor to not finish their contracted work within the specified time and cost. This endeavor was colossal and beyond the ordinary. Maybe it was for this reason that it appealed so much to William, prompting him to bid for a portion of the work, section number 1/3 of a mile. He employed many workers, resulting in a weekly payroll of $57,000, roughly $10,000 per day. He built lodging houses for the workers, complete with large kitchens, bakeries, and stores, where they could obtain everything they needed. Everything was designed with the skill that only someone of William's caliber could provide, as stated in the Illinois Historical Survey of 1894. Fate, however, turned against this ambitious project and the energetic and skilled compatriot behind it. Most of the terrain comprising section number 1 of the canal had an underlying layer of flintstone that was nearly impossible to break. Along the way, a disagreement arose between William and the canal trustees, leading them to withhold payment of hundreds of thousands of dollars, he claimed. As a result, William ceased the work, and his contract was declared forfeit and being transferred to another firm. But he still needed to pay his employees for their work, and he did so out of his own pocket, which could have made William a ruined man, as he lost around $500,000. Alfred therefore sued the Sanitary District of Chicago, which dragged on for many years. It was first filed in court in 1902, but he lost the case and had to appeal to the appellate court in 1904, which actually awarded him $407,000. However, the district appealed to the Supreme Court, and the final hearing took place in 1905, ruling in favor of the Sanitary District. Simultaneously with the Grand Canal project that William and Alfred embarked upon in 1893, William secured contracts for several state buildings at the 1893 Columbian World's Fair due to his esteemed reputation. The exhibition was a world event held to commemorate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus' arrival in the New World in 1492, and Chicago won the right to host it. The exhibition covered over 2.8 square kilometers and featured nearly 200 new buildings, mostly in neoclassical architecture, canals, lagoons, people, and cultures from 46 countries. Over 27 million people attended the exhibition during its 6-month run. The dedication ceremony took place on October 21st, 1892, but the fair opened to the public on May 1st, 1893, and remained accessible until October 30th, 1893. Besides acknowledging the 400th anniversary of the discovery of the New World from a European perspective, the fair also showcased Chicago's recovery from the ashes of the Great Chicago Fire that had devastated much of the city in 1871. William secured contracts for more than 5 buildings at the World's Fair. One of them was the Montana building, constructed in Romanesque style, and the cost was $16,000. The second was the Ohio building, built in colonial style, costing $30,000. The third was the Utah building, with costs amounting to $10,000. The fourth was the Texas building, with expenses totaling $25,600. And the fifth was the Illinois building. This building was by far the most pretentious of the state buildings and could be classified as one of the largest exhibition structures. The cost for this building was $250,000. It should be added that William worked together with the Danish architect Jens Meldal from Denmark, who supervised the construction of the State of Illinois building. Due to William's skill and the quality of his work, he received recognition medals embedded with beautiful gemstones and engraved with praise from state governors who gave them to him. He received a gold one from Ohio, a similar one from Texas, and a silver one from Montana. On October 9, 1893, designated as Chicago Day, the fair set a world record for outdoor event attendance, attracting 751,026 people. The expenses of the fair were quickly covered with a check for $1.5 million, equivalent to $48.9 million today. When the buildings were completed, William was a very wealthy man, owning about $500,000. On March 19, 1894, William became officially nominated as the Democratic alderman for the 10th Ward, which is a councilman for a specific district in Chicago. German newspapers in particular wrote about him in connection with the election. And here is an example of what one of the newspapers wrote. Colonel Harlev is one of the most well-known businessmen in Chicago. He is a contractor and builder of great reputation. Among the many contracts successfully executed by him were the Illinois building at the World's Fair and many of the state buildings. Colonel Harlev is constructing a large section of the draining canal and employs a large number of men in every way. End of quote. The election was held the following Tuesday, April 3rd, but William lost with 1,681 votes against 3,385 votes for the Republican Engels. In August 1897, William was chosen as a juror in one of Chicago's most sensational trials. On the defendant's bench sat none other than sausage manufacturer Adolf Lutgert, accused of murdering his wife, Louise Bicknese. The city was electric with tension. On every street corner, people whispered and rumors spread like wildfire. Louise had not merely vanished. Investigators claimed she had been dissolved in chemicals inside her husband's own factory vats. The evidence police presented was both gruesome and grotesque. Bone fragments, corset stays, a ring engraved with Louise's initials, and on top of that, witness after witness pointing directly at Lutgert. The press feasted on every detail. Day after day, newspapers splashed the story across their front pages until the case had grown beyond Chicago, beyond America, into a full-blown international media spectacle. The defense insisted that Louise had simply run away, but the prosecution painted a chilling picture. A man who had reduced his wife to nothing, dissolved in caustic potash, leaving only dust and fragments behind. Experts testified with grave certainty. The bones were human, and yet behind the closed doors of the jury room, the real drama began. There, William rose as the unexpected voice of resistance. Known for his stubborn streak and unshakable sense of justice, he refused to be swept up in the others' thirst for conviction. For 66 grueling hours, the arguments raged back and forth. Nearly every juror was convinced of Lutgert's guilt. They demanded the death penalty. But William stood firm. He doubted. The evidence was weak, and no body had ever been found. "Imagine," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "if Louise were to return one day. What shame would fall upon us for condemning an innocent man?" His words froze the room. Some fell quiet, others fumed. Several jurors even complained about him to the judge. But William would not yield, and without a unanimous verdict, the trial collapsed into a hung jury. The case had to be tried again. In January 1898, the trial was reopened, but this time William was no longer among the jurors. His warning voice was gone, and with it, Lutgert's last shield. The jury reached a swift, unanimous verdict: guilty. And on February 9th, Adolf Lutgert was sentenced to life in prison. But the story does not end there. Many years later, William confided a secret to his family. At the conclusion of the first trial, he had smuggled the bone fragments out of the jury room. When the prosecutor, during the second trial, presented the bones as evidence once again, William knew something was wrong. The evidence must have been fabricated, yet he dared not reveal the truth, for he himself had committed a crime by taking the remains. According to the family, William kept a box filled with newspaper clippings from the case and the mysterious bone fragments. Whether this story is true or merely another of William's tall tales remains a mystery. The only thing we know for certain is that Adolf Lutgert never served many years behind bars. Just 8 months after the verdict, he dropped dead of a heart attack in his prison cell. Since the unfortunate and failed canal construction project, William's company suffered a significant financial loss. After the World's Fair, he no longer engaged in major building projects, so William wasn't as active as before. Despite almost going bankrupt, his indomitable spirit prevailed, and in the late 1890s, he established a new business, Harlev burglar-proof ventilating sash lock, on LaSalle Street along with his sons. William Jr. had invented a window frame lock, and William himself invented a break-in-resistant ventilating window frame lock. They obtained patents for both inventions, but later sold them. In September 1909, William's wife Karen passed away at the age of 60. It undoubtedly was a great loss and sorrow for William, but fortunately, he had a large family around him. Here sits William, surrounded by his 2 adopted children, Arthur and Lily, with their spouses and children. Here in the picture, William is sitting, and behind him his son Alfred Harlev, his grandson William Hannibal Harlev, and his great-grandson Alfred Edvard Harlev. Decades later, William Harlev's grandson, William Hannibal Harlev, would write a dark chapter in the family history. In 1939, he became the center of a shocking crime that would end his life and take another's. For a year, he had been involved in a secret affair with Miss Georgia Fritz Hugh. But when Georgia discovered that William Hannibal was married, she ended the relationship. Consumed by anger, humiliation, and despair, William could not accept her rejection. On that fateful day, the confrontation escalated into violence. In a tragic and chilling act, William fired 5 shots, killing Georgia instantly. Her sister, Mrs. Virginia McAlpine, was wounded as she tried to intervene. Overwhelmed by guilt and the enormity of his crime, William turned the gun on himself, ending his life. In 1910, the business moved to 3314 Ogden Avenue, and William had now completely left construction behind as he was becoming an elderly man at 73 years old. Not long after, the business changed its name to U.S. Merchandise Company, where they made and sold jewelry and watches while also functioning as an optical store. The business was largely a family enterprise, with both his sons having roles, along with their work as contractors and architects. The adopted children Arthur and Lily also worked there, as well as Lily's husband, Peter William Peterson. Not only did they work together, but the families also lived in the same house or opposite each other on Sawyer Avenue for many years. Here we see the growing children of William Harlev's younger sister, Anne Charlotte. From left to right, they are Lily, Annie, Mimi, Mamie, William, and Arthur. Of these, it was Lily and Arthur whom William and Karen later adopted. In this picture, William is sitting in front of his house on Sawyer Avenue, holding his granddaughter Marie Louise, who was Lily's daughter. And in this photo, we have William with Marie Louise again, on his left side, a little older, and Arthur's 2 children, Bill and Flora. One can see that William cares deeply for his family. About William, it was told and written that he was an extremely pleasant and straightforward man, and his home was always known as a very hospitable place. He did many services for his countrymen, but his success and reputation often became the subject of envy, leading to slander. His fellow countrymen didn't always give him the credit he truly deserved. It ended with William no longer participating in various lodges and no longer being part of any Danish associations. He generally didn't spend much time with Danes anymore. But his friendship with Christian Fenger, whom he helped achieve success as a doctor in the early days, and with whom he ran the newspaper Heimdall, lasted for many years until Christian died in 1902 at only 62 years old. William was well liked for his interactions with his employees, whom he always treated with respect. Throughout his time as a contractor and during his employees' tenure, there was never a strike, and union workers were always used. An undoubtedly contributing factor to this was that irregularities in handling payroll never arose. William was one of the employers who, with kindness, ensured the best for both the employee and the contractor. This way, the newspaper Den Danske Pioneer from America wrote. They also wrote that he had a very active and aggressive personality. His helpfulness, generosity, and kindness were just as well known as his ruthlessness in striving to achieve a given goal. He was a well-known figure in Chicago, and there were very few Chicagoans, regardless of nationality or skin color, who hadn't heard of him. When he was mentioned, people would say, "Oh, Mr. Harlev, the one who built the White City." He was a very clever and smart man. Or perhaps when asked, "Do you know William Harlev?" the answer would be, "Yes, he's the one who saved Adolf Lutgert, the German sausage maker, from being hanged." After over 60 years in America, at the age of 87, William decided to return to his old homeland for a final visit and see his Danish family. In 1924, he traveled across the Atlantic, first visiting Berlin and then flying to Denmark. During this trip, the old man had to stay in the hospital for a couple of weeks after a minor plane crash before feeling strong enough to see his old homeland. In July 1924, he sailed back to America, and just half a year after his arrival, William died, with his American family by his side. And only one question remains open. Did he achieve everything he dreamed of when he stood behind the counter in Skive or the tavern in Copenhagen?